The story begins with Ethan Carter, a man who measured life in spreadsheets and bottom lines until a chance encounter with a little girl named Lily unraveled his carefully constructed world. It was a crisp November afternoon when she whispered those 5 words that would haunt him. "It's behind that wall." What Ethan thought was just another demolition project, a decaying office building in downtown Chicago, became a descent into shadows where forgotten truths festered. Because sometimes the past isn't just buried, it's screaming to be heard. And sometimes it takes the unflinching honesty of a child to expose what grown-ups refuse to see. This is a story about facades, the ones we tear down, the ones we hide behind, and the ones that, when shattered, force us to confront who we really are. Ethan had spent a decade mastering the art of erasure. At 36, he was the silent storm of real estate, turning historic districts into glass towers without a second thought. His signature move, always wearing a vintage pocket watch from his first deal, a trophy disguised as sentiment. That afternoon, his driver dropped him at the old Harrison building, its boarded-up windows like blind eyes watching the neighborhood kids play stickball in the alley. The wrecking crew would arrive at sunrise. "Final inspection, sir," his assistant reminded him. 30 minutes max. But as Ethan stepped onto the crumbling steps, his polished Oxfords crunching on broken glass, he froze. A girl sat cross-legged on the stoop, her rainbow-striped backpack clashing with the gray concrete. She was sketching furiously in a notebook, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This area's off limits," Ethan said, adjusting his cufflinks. The girl didn't flinch. "I know," she replied, finally looking up. Her eyes, a startling shade of green, held none of the fear he expected. "I'm Lily. My mom runs the diner across the street." She pointed to a neon Joe's Eats sign flickering in the distance, a place Ethan had never noticed despite his countless visits. Then she did something unexpected. She tore a page from her sketchbook and handed it to him. The drawing showed the Harrison building, but with a hidden door in the basement, a detail even Ethan's blueprints didn't include. "You should look here first," she said softly. "The walls, they're not empty." A gust of wind sent the paper fluttering against Ethan's chest. For the first time in years, his hands shook. Maybe it was the way Lily's voice dropped when she mentioned the walls, or how the streetlights suddenly buzzed like a warning. But in that moment, Ethan Carter, the man who'd built an empire on ignoring whispers, realized some secrets refuse to stay buried, especially when they're etched in a child's unwavering truth. The pocket watch in his vest ticked louder, counting down to a choice: walk away as planned, or follow a little girl's clue into the dark. Ethan stared at the sketch in his hands, the crude lines of Lily's drawing suddenly feeling heavier than any contract he'd ever signed. "The building comes down tomorrow," he said, more to himself than to her. But Lily didn't flinch. Instead, she stood up, brushing chalk dust from her overalls, and said the words that would unravel him. "Don't go yet. It's behind that wall." For a split second, Ethan almost smiled. Kids and their wild imaginations, hidden passages, buried treasure. But then he noticed the way Lily's fingers trembled, how her gaze flicked toward the building's boarded-up third-floor windows. "What wall?" he asked, his voice tighter than he intended. "The one they put up after the bad thing happened," Lily whispered. "Old Joe from the diner knows. He's been waiting for someone to listen." A chill crawled up Ethan's spine. Joe was the grizzled cook at the diner across the street, a man who'd served him coffee every morning without ever making small talk. The kind of man who saw everything and said nothing. Inside the Harrison building's lobby, the air smelled of mildew and something sharper like wet metal. Joe was there, leaning against the security desk, his apron still streaked with grease from the lunch rush. When Lily stepped forward, the old man's shoulders sagged as if he'd been holding his breath for years. "She told you?" he muttered. It wasn't a question. Ethan's pulse thudded in his ears. "What the hell's going on here?" Joe wiped his hands on his apron, leaving smudges of flour and something darker. "East Wing, 3rd floor. They sealed it up one night in '99. Not with permits, with panic." His voice dropped to a gravelly whisper. "I was here. Saw 3 men in suits hauling concrete bags up the service elevator. One of them had blood on his cuff." Lily tugged at Ethan's sleeve. "They took the door off the hinges," she said matter of fact, but the room's still there. Ethan's phone buzzed another email about tomorrow's demolition. He silenced it. Something in Joe's story didn't add up. If this was some cover-up, why didn't you report it? Joe's laugh was bitter. Who'd believe a fry cook over a city inspector's stamp? He reached into his pocket and slid a yellowed newspaper clipping across the desk. The headline read, "Local architect vanishes after late-night site visit." The date, November 12th, 1999. Lily pressed closer, her small hand finding Ethan's. "The walls talk," she said softly. "You just gotta know how to listen." Outside, the wind howled through the alley, rattling the chain-link fence. Ethan realized he was gripping Lily's sketch so hard the edges had crumpled. For the first time in his career, the thought of swinging a wrecking ball made him sick, because now he knew some walls weren't meant to be torn down. They were meant to be opened. Ethan's throat tightened as Joe's words hung in the air. Tommy Riggs. The old cook set his knuckles whitening around the newspaper clipping. Best electrician in Chicago. Had a wife, Maggie, and a baby girl on the way when they brought him in to fix the wiring that night. The diner's neon sign outside flickered, casting jagged shadows across Joe's face. They said it was an accident. Faulty wiring, they said. But Tommy knew his trade, and that man didn't make mistakes. Lily's small hand slipped into Ethan's, her fingers ice cold. "His little girl works at the library now," she whispered. "She checks out the same book every week, the one her daddy never got to read to her." Ethan's stomach turned. He'd seen that library past it every morning on his way to work. Some part of him must have known, must have sensed the ghosts in this neighborhood's bones. Why cover it up? The question came out rougher than he intended. Joe reached behind the security desk and pulled out a rusted metal box. Inside lay a single work badge, the photo faded, but the name clear. Thomas Riggs, Level 3 electrician. Because 2 days before he died, Tommy filed a complaint, Joe said. Said he found shoddy wiring in half the building, the kind that starts fires. He tapped the badge with a grease-stained finger. Next day, the complaint vanished, and so did Tommy. A sudden crash echoed from upstairs, the sound of plaster cracking. All three of them froze. Lily's grip on Ethan's hand became vice-tight. "That's the East Wing," she breathed. "Nobody's been up there in 20 years. Ethan's phone buzzed again, his demolition foreman. Crews on schedule for 7 a.m. "You good with the plans?" The text glowed in the dim lobby, a reminder of the world where he was still the king of clean slates. But now he saw the truth: some slates weren't clean. They were blood-stained. Then came the sound that stopped his heart. A child's laughter, high, clear, and unmistakably coming from the sealed third floor. Lily's face went pale. "That's not possible," she whispered. "Tommy's daughter. She's grown up now." Joe crossed himself, his lips moving in silent prayer. But Ethan was already moving toward the stairs, Lily's sketch crumpled in one hand, Tommy's badge in the other. The elevator had been disconnected years ago, but the service stairs still stood, their metal railings pitted with rust like old scars. As his foot hit the first step, the building groaned around him as if waking from a long sleep. Somewhere above, a door creaked open. Ethan knew then that wrecking balls couldn't bury every secret. Some truths didn't just want to be found, they demanded it. The service stairs groaned under Ethan's weight as he climbed each step, releasing a puff of dust that shimmered in the slanted afternoon light. Behind him, Lily clutched the railing, her breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. Joe had refused to follow, muttering about old bones knowing better, but Ethan caught the way his eyes flicked upward like he was afraid of what might be looking back. The third-floor hallway stretched before them, a tunnel of peeling wallpaper and doors with frosted glass panes. At the far end, where the blueprints showed an open workspace, stood a concrete barrier, its surface too smooth, too new against the building's decay. Lily's fingers traced a hairline crack in the wall. "They poured it in a hurry," she whispered. "You can still smell the fear in the concrete." Ethan pressed his palm against the cold surface. Then he heard it, a faint rhythmic tapping from the other side. 3 quick knocks, then silence, then 3 more. Before he could react, sharp footsteps echoed from the stairwell. "Mr. Carter!" The voice sent a jolt through him. Sarah Hargrove, his lead architect, stood at the hallway's entrance, her tablet glowing in the dim light. At 32, she was the youngest partner in firm history, the blueprint prodigy, who'd redesigned half of downtown. But now her usual confidence was fractured. The demolition permits? There's an issue. Ethan didn't miss how her gaze darted past him to the sealed wall. What kind of issue? Sarah's throat worked as she swallowed. The original 1999 inspection reports just surfaced in the city archives. This whole wing was red-tagged for electrical fires. She hesitated, then added quietly, signed off by a safety inspector named Thomas Riggs. The air left Ethan's lungs. Lily's sketch, the hidden door in the basement, suddenly made terrible sense. You knew, he said, watching Sarah's face closely. That's why you fought so hard to preserve the building's facade in the new designs. A high-pitched whine began emanating from behind the wall, like old wiring under strain. Sarah's tablet slipped from her fingers, shattering on the linoleum. My uncle worked the night shift here in '99, she blurted. He came home with burns on his hands and never spoke about it again. The wall's crack widened with an audible snap. A whisper of air escaped, carrying the unmistakable scent of scorched paper and something darker. Ethan's demolition order suddenly felt like a death warrant. Some buildings didn't just hold secrets. They were alive with them, and this one wasn't ready to die. Lily reached into her backpack and pulled out a small, tattered photo, a young electrician grinning beside a pregnant woman. Tommy left this in the diner booth, she said. I think he wants us to know who's really behind that wall. Outside, the first demolition truck rumbled onto the street. Ethan watched Sarah's face pale as the scratching behind the wall grew louder now, unmistakably rhythmic, like fingers dragging across concrete. Lily pressed Tommy's photo against the barrier, her small hands trembling. He's trying to tell us something, she whispered. Vanessa? No. Sarah took a step back, her designer heels catching on broken tile. This is insane, she hissed, but her eyes kept darting to a specific spot near the ceiling where the wallpaper bulged unnaturally. That wall was sealed by court order after the settlement. You have no right. Ethan moved before he could think, driving his shoulder into the weakened section. Plaster dust rained down as something metallic clattered to the floor, a rusted key stamped with Cross Development's old logo. Sarah made a choked sound and lunged for it, but Lily was faster, snatching it up with a gasp. It's the same key in Tommy's photo, she cried, pointing to the faded picture where the same key hung around the electrician's neck. The wall groaned. A chunk of concrete dislodged, revealing a sliver of darkness beyond. The air that rushed out carried the acrid tang of burnt copper and something sweetly rotten, the unmistakable scent of old tragedy. Sarah's composure shattered. My father swore they'd cleaned everything out. She choked out tears cutting through her makeup. He promised no one would ever... A thunderous crash from downstairs cut her off. Joe's voice bellowed up the stairwell, raw with panic. They moved up the demolition. The wrecking ball's here now. Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from his foreman. Boss, we got a problem. City just faxed over old blueprints showing an unpermitted sub-basement. Whole crews spooked. Lily was already clawing at the broken wall, her fingers bleeding as she pried loose another chunk. They're not just hiding what happened, she panted. They're hiding who's still in there. Somewhere below, glass shattered. The building shuddered as heavy machinery growled to life. Sarah covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. But Ethan was already reaching into the widening gap, his fingers brushing against something cold and smooth, a porcelain doll's face half buried in the rubble. Its glass eyes reflected the emergency lights as they suddenly flickered to life, bathing the hallway in blood-red glow. The doll's tiny hand clutched a yellowed slip of paper. Ethan didn't need to unfold it to know what it would say. Some truths refuse to stay buried, especially when the dead insist on delivering them personally. Ethan found Lily exactly where he knew she'd be, perched on the Harrison Building's crumbling front steps, her rainbow backpack glowing under the streetlight. The wrecking ball loomed in the darkness across the street, its shadow stretching toward them like a threat. You heard it too, she said without looking up. Her fingers clutched Tommy's doll, its cracked face tilted toward the third-floor window where a single light now flickered, impossible, since Ethan had cut power to the building himself. He sat beside her, the cold concrete biting through his coat. Sarah's father didn't just cover up an accident, did he? Lily shook her head, her breath fogging in the air. They were testing faulty wiring, the kind that gets hot but doesn't trip breakers. Tommy found out. She pointed to the doll's tiny hand, where Ethan now saw a scorched scrap of paper threaded through its fingers. Unfolding it revealed a child's shaky handwriting. "Daddy says they're going to burn the evidence tonight." A crash echoed from inside the building. The flickering light upstairs went dark, then flared red as an alarm began blaring, a sound Ethan hadn't heard since his grandfather's tales of factory fires in the 70s. Lily stood abruptly. "They're waking up." Ethan's phone lit up with Sarah's frantic calls, but his attention was locked on the building's front doors. Through the grimy glass shadows moved too tall to be rats, too purposeful to be dust. One stopped directly opposite them, its outline flickering like an old film reel. Then came the sound that stopped his heart, 3 knocks from inside, perfectly spaced. The same pattern Lily had drawn on her sketch. The doll's head turned with a porcelain click, its glass eyes reflecting not the streetlights but flames that hadn't burned in 20 years. Lily didn't flinch. "They need us to open the wall," she whispered. "Not to let them out, but to let the truth in." Somewhere in the darkness, a demolition engine roared to life. Ethan knew then that some fires never really go out. They just wait for someone brave enough to fan the flames. Ethan's hands shook as he gripped the crowbar, the metal cold against his palms. The building seemed to hold its breath around them. Even the wind had gone still. Lily stood beside him, her small fingers wrapped around the doll's burnt message, while Joe aimed his flashlight at the wall with hands that hadn't trembled like this since Vietnam. "It's not just Tommy in there," Lily whispered. The beam of light caught something they'd missed before, dozens of tiny handprints pressed into the concrete, some so small they could only belong to a child. Joe's breath hitched. "The daycare center," he choked out. "They used to run one in the East Wing. Parents from the garment factory downstairs." His flashlight wavered, illuminating a date scratched near the floor, 9/16/99, the day after Tommy disappeared. A new sound cut through the silence, not knocking this time, but a child's giggle, high and bright, followed by the unmistakable jingle of a toy piano. Lily's head snapped up. "They're playing," she breathed. Ethan drove the crowbar into the crack with a force that surprised him. Plaster rained down as the wall gave way, revealing not an office but a nightmare frozen in time. Tiny chairs overturned, a storybook splayed open to a fire safety lesson, and a single tiny shoe lying in a shaft of moonlight. Then the smell hit them, not decay but smoke. Fresh smoke. Lily reached into the darkness and pulled out a perfectly preserved teddy bear, its fur matted with something dark. "This was today," she said, her voice trembling. "The fire's still burning where they are." Joe crossed himself as the flashlight flickered, casting monstrous shadows that moved against the light. The toy piano's notes grew faster, frantic, morphing into a distorted version of Frère Jacques. Just as Ethan's phone blared to life with Sarah's scream, "The blueprints were faked. There's no basement on the..." The line went dead. Outside, the wrecking ball's engine revved. Ethan realized the horrible truth too late. They hadn't broken into the wall. They'd broken out whatever was left inside. And now, as the first rays of dawn painted the sky, the building began to hum with the sound of children singing along to a fire alarm that had rung 20 years too late. Ethan swung the sledgehammer again, the impact sending spiderweb cracks racing through the concrete. The third blow shattered the wall, completely revealing a hidden chamber that shouldn't exist, a perfect cube of space untouched by time. Dust swirled in their flashlight beams like ghosts waking from long sleep. The room was a time capsule of horror. File cabinets stood with drawers yanked open, their contents spilling across the floor. Safety inspection reports stamped "Approved" in red ink time cards with names crossed out in black marker, and a stack of Polaroids that made Joe's flashlight clatter to the ground. "Oh God," the old cook choked out, staring at the top photo, a grinning foreman standing before a wall of sparking electrical panels, his boot resting on a toolbox with the initials TR painted in white. The date scrawled at the bottom matched Tommy's disappearance, 9/15/99. Lily picked up a cassette tape labeled in careful block letters, "Final test. Do not erase." When she pressed play on the dusty recorder sitting atop a filing cabinet, a child's voice sang out, "London Bridge is falling down," before cutting to static and a man's panicked shout, "The breakers aren't tripping. The whole panel's live. Somebody get the kids. Then came the sound that didn't belong on the tape. A new voice, crisp and professional. Burn everything. The settlement pays triple if there's no evidence. Ethan recognized that voice. It was Harold Hale Cross Development's original owner, Sarah's father. The flashlight beams suddenly dimmed as the temperature plummeted. Frost crackled across the Polaroids as the cassette player switched itself back on, the static resolving into dozens of whispering voices, all saying the same word, out. Outside, the wrecking ball's diesel engine roared to life. The building shuddered as steel cables tightened. Lily grabbed Ethan's hand, her skin ice cold. "They're not trying to keep us out," she whispered. "They're begging us to get them out before—" The first impact shook the foundation. Dust rained from the ceiling as the hidden room's single light bulb, dead for 20 years, suddenly blazed to life, revealing what they'd missed. Small handprints, dozens of them, pressed into the concrete in perfect, terrified rows. Ethan's hands shook as he lifted a yellowed incident report from the floor, the paper crisp with age, but the bloodstain in the corner still rust-red. The words, "Fatality," "Containment," "Protocol Initiated," were stamped across the top in bold black letters. Joe grabbed a crumbling blueprint off the wall, his calloused fingers tracing emergency exit routes that had been crossed out with red marker. "They blocked the fire escapes," he rasped. "The daycare. Those babies never had a chance." Lily crouched in the corner, her small hands carefully arranging a stack of Polaroids that told a story more horrifying than any of them could imagine. Each photo showed the same sequence workers frantically sealing doors, a shadowy figure in a suit handing out envelopes, and finally the shot that made Ethan's stomach lurch, a grinning foreman posing beside a newly poured concrete wall while smoke curled from its edges. The cassette player clicked back on without warning, the tape hissing to life with a new recording. Final memo, September 16, 1999. All structural damage from yesterday's electrical fire has been contained. No casualties reported. Remind the demolition crew in 2024 to use thermite on the east wing. A child's sob echoed through the speakers, followed by a whisper that wasn't on the tape at all, but seemed to come from the walls themselves. We were still inside. Outside, the wrecking ball's steel cable groaned under tension. The building trembled as the machine revved its engine, 20 years too late to save them, but right on time to bury the evidence forever. Lily pressed her small palm against one of the tiny handprints in the concrete. As their flashlights flickered, the prints began to glow, dozens of them, lighting a path to a metal door none of them had noticed before. The words, "Fire Exit," were still visible beneath layers of paint, the panic bar rusted solid. Ethan realized with dawning horror that they weren't just uncovering the past, they were standing in a tomb, and the wrecking ball's countdown had already begun. Ethan's breath caught as he recognized the voices outside, Sarah Hargrove's clipped tones mixing with the gravelly rasp of an older man. "The demolition crew's on standby," Sarah was saying. "But we need to check the east wing first. Carter's been asking too many questions." Joe grabbed Ethan's arm, his whisper urgent. "That's Harold Hale's voice, Sarah's father. He's supposed to be in a nursing home in Florida." Lily pressed against the wall, Tommy's doll clutched to her chest. The tiny porcelain face had cracked completely now, revealing something metallic inside a micro-cassette tape no bigger than a thumbnail. The flashlight beams grew brighter. Harold's voice turned sharp. "You said you burned everything in '99. "We did," Sarah snapped back, "but Whitaker must have—" A sudden crash cut her off as one of the file cabinets toppled over, spilling its contents with a sound like 100 whispers. The Polaroids fluttered to the ground, each one landing face up, every image showing Harold Hale standing beside the same concrete wall, his smile growing wider in each successive photo as the smoke thickened behind him. Lily slipped the tiny tape into the recorder. The playback was barely audible, but the words were unmistakable. "Payouts triple if the daycare accident gets blamed on faulty wiring. Just make sure the fire burns hot enough this time." Outside, Sarah screamed not in anger but in terror. "Dad, the door, it's—" The metal fire exit they'd discovered earlier slammed open with a force that shook the building, though no one had touched it. A rush of freezing air filled the hidden room, carrying with it the scent of melted plastic and baby powder. Ethan's flashlight died. In the sudden darkness, dozens of tiny handprints on the walls began to glow an eerie blue. The wrecking ball's engine roared outside its steel cable, whining as it reached full tension. Some secrets don't stay buried. Some fires never go out. And some voices, no matter how small, demand to be heard. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky, the building's long, silent fire alarm suddenly wailed to life, its shrill scream cutting through 20 years of lies. The last thing Ethan saw before the wrecking ball struck was Lily reaching toward the glowing handprints, not in fear, but in welcome. Ethan pressed Lily behind a toppled file cabinet as the voices slithered through the broken wall. Sarah's stiletto heels clicked against concrete like a countdown, each step closer ratcheting the tension tighter. 25 years, came Harold Hale's wheezing voice, older now but still dripping with the same arrogance. 25 years we kept this quiet, and now some washed-up developer with a savior complex is going to blow it all open. Joe's breath hitched as a flashlight beam swept over their hiding spot. The beam paused on a stack of files, each labeled with a child's name in black marker. Sarah's reply came out in a hiss. "We paid off every inspector, buried every report. Even the fire department bought the faulty wiring story. But we never accounted for Whitaker keeping evidence." A new sound cut through the tension, the squeak of rusty hinges. The metal fire exit door swung open on its own, revealing the darkened stairwell. Harold's flashlight beam trembled as it illuminated tiny footprints in the dust. Footprints leading into the sealed room. Lily suddenly stood, Tommy's doll clutched to her chest. Before Ethan could stop her, she pressed play on the recorder. The tape hissed, then erupted with a sound that froze the Hales mid-step, a child's voice singing "Ring Around the Rosie," cut through by screams and the roar of flames. Harold dropped his flashlight with a clatter. "That's impossible," Sarah whispered. "We destroyed those tapes." From the darkness beyond the fire door came 3 distinct knocks, then 3 more. Then dozens tiny fists pounding from the other side of a wall that shouldn't exist. The wrecking ball's engine revved outside its hydraulic arms, groaning as it prepared to strike. Harold lunged for the exit, but the metal door slammed shut with finality, trapping them all inside with the truth. As the first impact shook the building, the room's single light bulb flickered to life, revealing what the Hales had tried so hard to bury. Dozens of tiny handprints on the walls, glowing now in the dark, and every last one of them moving. Ethan held his breath as Harold Hale's shadow loomed just inches from their hiding spot. The old man's rancid cologne mixed with the scent of burning plastic from the overloaded wiring still hidden in the walls, the same wiring that had failed on September 16, 1999. People who matter. Harold spat, kicking over a file cabinet labeled Day Care Roster. Tiny handprints flared brighter where his shoe made contact. That electrician and his brats weren't even supposed to be here that night. Their deaths were their own damn fault. Lily's phone continued recording the red light, barely visible behind a stack of moldering safety reports. But it was the other light that caught Ethan's attention, the glow from Tommy's doll growing brighter, its cracked face now fully split open to reveal the microcassette still playing that haunting nursery rhyme. Sarah's designer heels clicked toward the broken wall. "We'll torch the place at 3 a.m., she decided, her voice clinical. "Gas line rupture during final demolition prep. Tragic accident." A new sound cut through the darkness, the squeal of rusted metal. The fire exit door groaned open again, though no living hand touched it. Cold air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of charred construction paper and melted crayons. Harold's flashlight beam shook as it illuminated the doorway. "That's impossible," he whispered. "We welded that shut after—" The doll's recording changed abruptly to a voice none of them recognized, a child's whisper threading through the static. "Teacher says it's fire drill day, but why's the door locked?" Outside, the wrecking ball's engine roared to life. The building shuddered as the massive steel ball drew back for its first strike. Ethan realized with dawning horror that the Hales weren't just trying to destroy evidence. They were trying to outrun ghosts that had been waiting 25 years for this moment. And as the first tiny hand emerged from the darkness of the fire exit, not skeletal, not spectral, but perfectly preserved in death, as it had been in life, Ethan understood the terrible truth. Some fires don't just burn buildings, they burn through time itself. Ethan watched the glow from Lily's phone screen flicker across her face, not disappointment in her eyes now, but a fierce determination that burned brighter than any fire. The recording light pulsed like a heartbeat as Harold Hale's shadow fell across their hiding spot. "Profit margins," Sarah was saying, her voice dripping with contempt. "That's all Carter cares about. He'll sign whatever NDA we put in front of him once we cut him in on the new development deal. Ethan felt something break open inside him, not the cold calculation of a developer who'd built his career on Demolition, but the raw fury of a man who'd just realized he'd been complicit in erasing lives. His fingers found the Polaroid still in his pocket, the one showing Harold grinning beside that freshly poured wall, and suddenly he understood what Lily had known all along. Some walls weren't meant to be torn down. They were meant to be witnessed. Lily's hand slipped into his, her fingers sticky with plaster dust and something darker. She pressed Tommy's doll into his palm, the tiny recorder now playing its final message, a fire alarm wailing, children screaming, and one clear voice cutting through the chaos. "Tell them we counted to 20 like teacher said. Tell them we waited by the door." The flashlight beam hit them full in the face. Harold's gasp echoed through the ruined office. "Carter, and what the hell is that?" His shaking finger pointed at Lily's phone, still recording. Ethan stood slowly pulling Lily behind him. "Evidence," he said, his voice steady for the first time in hours, "of 25 counts of negligent homicide, and one very thorough cover-up." Sarah lunged for the phone, but the fire exit door slammed shut with a bang that shook the building. The wrecking ball's engine roared outside its steel cable, whining as it reached full tension. Lily's voice cut through the chaos clear as a bell. "They're here." Every tiny handprint on the walls began to glow at once, not the eerie blue from before, but a brilliant, blinding white. The temperature plummeted as the fire alarm blared to life its shrill scream, cutting through decades of silence. Some fires don't just burn through time. They reset it, and as the wrecking ball struck with a thunderous crash, Ethan realized the truth too late. They weren't demolishing a building. They were opening a tomb. Lily's whistle cut through the night like a blade, 3 sharp blasts that sent pigeons scattering from the rooftop. The sound ricocheted off the condemned walls, carrying further than any human voice ever could. Harold's face went sheet white. "That's the old factory distress signal," he choked out. "The one the daycare teachers used when..." Sirens answered almost immediately, wailing through the Chicago streets like ghosts finally given voice. Red and blue lights painted the crumbling walls through broken windows as squad cars skidded to a halt outside. Sarah grabbed Harold's arm. "We have to go now," she hissed. But the fire exit door, the one they'd welded shut 25 years ago, refused to budge. Lily stepped forward, Tommy's doll held high like a torch. "Too late," she said softly. The walls began to hum. Not the eerie whisper from before, but a deep, resonant vibration that shook loose decades of dust. Ethan realized with dawning horror what was happening. The building's original fire suppression system, long since disconnected, was powering back to life. Sprinkler heads creaked, then burst open with a metallic scream, raining rust-colored water that smelled of smoke and copper. Through the broken windows, Ethan saw flashlights sweeping the street, not just cops, but news vans too. Lily's whistle had done more than call for help. It had summoned witnesses. Sarah made a desperate lunge for Lily's phone, but the doll's recorder switched on by itself, broadcasting Tommy's final message to the dripping room. "Tell them we did everything right. Tell them we lined up at the door like we were supposed to." The last words were drowned out by the wrenching groan of steel, the wrecking ball's arm swinging wide as the operator jumped clear, its massive weight tearing free of its cables. Harold screamed as it came crashing through the east wall sunlight, pouring through the new opening like a spotlight on their decades-old crime scene. And there in the swirling dust and chaos stood a dozen tiny shadows, not ghosts, not memories, but evidence, their small hands still pressed against the one wall that had never been sealed. The wall with the emergency exit. The wall where the daycare roster still hung. The wall that now finally told the truth. Ethan stood in the wreckage as dawn painted the sky, watching investigators move through the ruins of the Harrison building. The doll's recorder still played softly in an evidence bag, Tommy's voice now preserved alongside stacks of scorched time cards and the daycare roster with 25 tiny check marks next to evacuation drill. Detective Ruiz, a grizzled Chicago PD veteran with fire scars on his hands, scrolled through Lily's phone. "This changes everything," he muttered. "Hale Construction's insurance fraud, the OSHA reports they buried." His eyes flicked to where Harold and Sarah sat handcuffed in a squad car. But statute of limitations ran out on the 99 incident years ago. Lily tugged Ethan's sleeve. In her palm lay a melted plastic name tag, Tommy Riggs, master electrician. "They can't be punished," she said quietly, "but they can pay." Ethan understood. He knelt beside her as news cameras circled. Cross Development will fund a memorial, he announced loud enough for every microphone to catch. Right here on this lot, with the names of every person lost that night. His voice broke as he added what should have been said 25 years ago, starting with Thomas Riggs and the 24 children from Little Stars Daycare. The doll's recorder clicked off. For the first time in hours, there was silence. Then from the rubble where the east wing had stood came the sound of a fire alarm powering down its dying beep, echoing like a final all-clear signal. Detective Ruiz nodded to his team. Get the Martinez family on the phone. And someone find Tommy Riggs' daughter. She's got a right to hear this herself. As the first reporters surged forward, Lily pressed the name tag into Ethan's hand. The plastic was warm now, as if freshly worn. Some fires don't need vengeance, just acknowledgement. And some walls once broken reveal not horror, but the chance to finally rebuild properly. Ethan stood before the crowd at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, the Chicago wind carrying the scent of fresh paint from the newly restored Harrison Building facade. The once crumbling structure now bore a gleaming brass plaque, the Thomas Riggs Memorial Center, where truth finds its voice. Lily fidgeted beside him in a sunflower yellow dress, her small hands clutching two items: the restored photo of Tommy and his pregnant wife, and a tiny fireman's helmet recovered from the rubble. Maggie Riggs Nowak, Tommy's daughter, now a trauma nurse with her father's electrician's license framed above her desk, stepped to the microphone. The crowd fell silent as she held up a melted circuit breaker, its date stamp still visible, 9/15/99. My dad died because someone valued profit over safety, she said, her voice steady. But today isn't about blame. It's about making sure no other little girl grows up hearing lies about how her father disappeared. She turned to Ethan, tears glinting in the sunlight. You could have walked away. Instead, you tore down the right wall. The doll's recorder, now displayed in a glass case in the lobby, suddenly crackled to life without anyone touching it. Tommy's voice filled the courtyard one last time. Tell them I stayed until every kid got out. A gust of wind sent cherry blossoms swirling around the crowd as Lily stepped forward. She placed the tiny fireman's helmet at the memorial's base, where 25 solar-powered lights now glowed at dusk, one for each life lost. Ethan knelt beside her as reporters snapped photos. You were right about the wall, he whispered. Lily smiled, pointing to the newly installed emergency exit, its door propped permanently open. Some walls should stay broken, she said. And as the ribbon fell, Ethan finally understood. The most important demolitions aren't done with wrecking balls, but with truth. Some buildings don't need to be torn down. They need to bear witness. Ethan found Lily in the Memorial Center's sunlit atrium, arranging a circle of chairs with military precision. At each seat she'd placed a small object, a melted crayon, a fireman's badge, a tiny pair of child's glasses recovered from the rubble, reminders that every story deserved to be heard. Special guest today, she announced, straightening the last chair. Ethan recognized the name stitched into its cushion, Maggie Riggs Nowak. The doll's display case nearby suddenly hummed to life, its interior lights flickering as Tommy's voice whispered through the speakers. Tell them I'd do it all again. Maggie entered, holding her father's old lunch pail, its dented surface still bearing the sticker Lily had carefully restored. World's Best Dad, Love Bean, his nickname for her before she was born. The crowd, construction workers in clean high-vis vests, families who'd lost loved ones to workplace accidents. Even the mayor leaned forward as she opened it. Inside lay not sandwiches but proof, the original safety complaint Tommy had filed, its edges charred, but words still legible. Maggie's voice didn't shake as she read aloud, Panel 7B overheating daily. Will fail catastrophically if not replaced. Refused repair order attached. Ethan caught Lily's eye across the circle. She held up her phone, the same one that had captured the Hale's confession, now displaying a live donation ticker, $2.7 million raised for the Riggs Scholarship Fund. As Maggie finished speaking, the memorial's lights dimmed of their own accord. 25 beams of light projected onto the ceiling, resolving into constellations no astronomer would recognize. A hard hat here, a storybook there, each one named for a life that should have grown old. The doll's recorder played its final message, Tommy's voice blending with children's laughter. Tell them we're okay now. Tell them to keep the doors open. Outside, construction crews worked on the new wing, its blueprints showing not a single locked door, not one concealed space. Just light and air and truth running through the halls like electricity finally grounded. Some stories don't end when the wrecking ball swings. They begin. Ethan sat cross-legged in the memorial's truth circle, Watching Maggie Riggs Nowak pass around her father's old thermos, still smelling of coffee after all these years, as she told stories about the electrician who'd sung lullabies to his unborn daughter through her mother's belly. A lanky teenager named Darius, one of the center's first welding trainees, rubbed his thumb over the thermos's dented side. My pop says they fired Mr. Tommy for speaking up about the faulty wiring 3 times before, you know. He hesitated, then added quietly, says the whole crew knew what was coming. Maggie didn't flinch. She simply opened her father's last paycheck, uncashed the paper brittle as autumn leaves, and pointed to the smudged fingerprint in the corner. He clocked out early that night to check panel 7B one last time. That's when he found the daycare staff trapped. Lily, perched on the windowsill with Tommy's doll in her lap, suddenly sat up straight. The doll's head tilted with an audible click, its glass eyes reflecting the afternoon sun in thin red beams that landed precisely on the memorial wall, illuminating 25 names that had almost been erased. Ethan felt his phone vibrate. A text from his demolition foreman, "Boss, you gotta see this." Attached was a photo of the Harrison Building's original cornerstone uncovered during renovations. Etched beneath the official plaque was a child's crude carving, "Tommy saved us." Maggie's breath hitched as Ethan showed her. "That's new," she whispered. "That wasn't there when—" The doll's recorder switched on, playing back Tommy's voice one last time, softer now. "Tell them I'd choose the same, every time." Outside, the wind chimes made from salvaged construction materials, rebar pipe fittings, even a rusted hard hat sang a discordant melody. Lily pressed her palm against the cool glass, as if feeling the vibration. "Some walls don't just hide truth," she said, watching the chimes dance. "They test it." And as the sun dipped below the Chicago skyline, Ethan finally understood the most important structures aren't made of steel and concrete, but of stories told and silences broken, of memory stubborn as a weed through cracked pavement, insisting, "We were here. We mattered. Listen." Ethan leaned against the Memorial Center's sun-warmed bricks, watching Lily teach Darius's little sister how to press her handprint into fresh concrete, a new tradition for every child who walked through their doors. The tiny palm would dry beside Tommy Riggs's salvaged work badge, 2 generations of stories cemented into the building's bones. "You really think Maggie forgives us?" Ethan asked quietly. The thermos in his hands still held the ghost of Tommy's last coffee. Lily didn't look up from helping the girl smooth her fingerprint into the wet mix. "Not us," she corrected. "Them." She pointed to where Harold Hale's former accountant was giving a pro bono workshop on financial transparency, his parole ankle monitor blinking under his pressed slacks. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about making sure it doesn't happen again." The doll, now permanently displayed in a case wired to Tommy's original circuit panels, suddenly lit up its cracked face, glowing as the center's speakers played the last seconds of the recovered safety tape. "Panel 7B secure. All children accounted for. This is Thomas Riggs signing off." The recording ended abruptly, as it always did, but now Ethan heard what he'd missed before the faintest hum of children singing London Bridge in the static. Darius approached, wiping grease from his first welding certification. "Mr. Ethan, we finished the memorial gate." The wrought iron entrance now bore 25 unique designs, tiny fireman hats, storybooks, even a perfect miniature hard hat, each forged from scraps recovered from the demolition. But it was the gate's mechanism that would make Tommy proud, no locks. Just a heavy counterweight shaped like a child's outstretched hand, keeping it perpetually open. As the neighborhood kids rushed to try it, Lily pressed something into Ethan's palm, a rusted bolt from the original scaffolding. "For your new office," she said, "so you never forget which walls matter." The late afternoon sun hit the memorial wall just then, casting the names in gold. Ethan finally understood what the building had been trying to tell him all along. Some structures aren't meant to stand forever. They're meant to become doorways. And the most important demolitions don't tear down, they reveal. As Lily's laughter mingled with the squeak of the new gate swinging wide, Ethan pocketed the bolt. Not as a reminder of what was lost, but as a promise. The next wall he built would have windows. The camera lingers on the memorial gate's perpetual swing, back and forth, its hinges singing in the wind like children on a playground. Fade to black. Then white text appears on screen. This isn't just Tommy's story, or Lily's, or yours. It's every story we almost didn't hear, because someone built a wall. The screen cuts to security footage from the Harrison building's final moments, grainy black and white images of Ethan swinging that first sledgehammer, Lily's tiny hands prying at loose concrete the exact instant when sunlight first hit the hidden files. A child's voice whispers over the footage, "Tell them we're still here." Cut to present-day Darius welding his signature onto the memorial gate. Maggie Riggs Nowak reading "Goodnight Moon" to toddlers in the rebuilt daycare, Lily pressing play on Tommy's recorder for a new group of wide-eyed visitors. The screen fades again. 3 simple words appear. "Tear down walls.